Korea has seen 3 earthquakes in April alone, all of which originated in the East Sea. Although all 3 measured magnitudes of below 4.3, the unusual frequency of the quakes has caught people's attention. Adding to concerns is the recent series of quakes that hit the Asian region, including India and the Philippines. Today, we go in-depth with Dr. Seok Goo of the Korea Institute of Geoscience and Mineral Resources to further discuss the increasing seismic activity in the region. Good to have you with us.
Hi.
A 2.5 magnitude quake hit Korea's southernmost Jeju Island, while a 5.6 quake struck Japan's Hokkaido prefecture the following day. And just a few hours ago, a 5.2 magnitude quake has also hit Myanmar. So obviously we're seeing frequent quakes in the Asian region. Would you say there's a link between these quakes?
I don't see clear links between them. If 2 earthquakes occur very close to each other, like tens of kilometers, we may say that one event is triggered by the other. We call it the stress transfer mechanism. So if one earthquake occurs, the stress condition in the region is redistributed, making a more favorable environment for the next one to occur. But the distance between those events is like hundreds of kilometers or thousands of kilometers. At least it's not easy to show the clear link between those events in a physical sense.
So if there is no link, then what is making these frequent quakes occur in the Asian region?
I think it is coincidence. So sometimes earthquakes occur everywhere in the world very frequently, but some earthquakes has got the people's attention because of a lot of damages and casualties. Maybe some of them are very close to you, and so you feel the shaking there. So sometimes we think that there is some frequent earthquake occurrence, but I think it's not that far away from the normal pattern.
Some experts claim the Asian region can expect additional series of earthquakes in the near future. What's your take on that?
Well, maybe, probably. So unfortunately, that's all I can say now. I think that's maybe we need to admit that that's the current level of the technology we have. Sometimes people say that it's easier to predict the past earthquakes, but not the future earthquake. Some researchers try to explain that why the earthquake occurred and what's the relation between them. But even for them, it's much more difficult to predict the future coming ones. So everything is possible, but not easy to say something is going on.
Of course, it is very hard to predict natural disasters. Korea has been relatively free from earthquake concerns, but following the 2 very strong quakes that hit Korea's Gyeongsangbuk-do province in 2016 and 2017, there are growing concerns among Korean people. Could you tell us about the studies that are being conducted at your department at the Korea Institute of Geoscience and Mineral Resources?
So basically, our institute is in charge of monitoring all the seismic activities in Korea, including both the natural and artificial events. Artificial means like a nuclear test in North Korea. And also, as a research institute, we go further to understand the physical mechanism of those seismic activities. So in my case, I'm more interested in the coming expected the level or characteristics of the ground shaking that caused by the big earthquakes. Because in terms of seismic hazards, sometimes it's more important to understand the characteristics of the ground shaking rather than the earthquake itself. Because using those information, we can use them for some kind of earthquake engineering applications, like earthquake-resistant design. And also, we have been working on developing the earthquake early warning system and optimize them for the Korean Peninsula as well.
Now, you've just mentioned that sometimes you need to focus more on ground shaking than the earthquake itself. For our viewers, could you give us a more detailed explanation on what you mean by ground shaking?
So many people, they are interested in whether we can predict the earthquake or not. But sometimes when you talk about the seismic hazard, the ground shaking is more important. So I think somehow we say that, have you heard about this phrase like the fire on the other side of the river? So if we have the same earthquake, depending where we are, on the hard rock side or some soft sediments, we may go through quite different level of ground shaking. So if you really want to understand the seismic hazard, maybe in this building, what kind of ground shaking we are going to expect for this specific building, that's a very valuable information.
Now, the Ring of Fire refers to a seismically active belt in the Asian Pacific region. Now, Korea does not sit on the Ring of Fire. Then why are we seeing frequent quakes in Korea's eastern coastal areas?
Yeah, in general, the earthquakes occur, especially the large earthquakes, they occur along the plate boundaries, like Japan is one very good example. But we need to know that the earthquakes can occur everywhere on Earth, so including Korea. So of course, the earthquake size might be low, and then the recurrence period might be long and also irregular, but it will occur. According to KMA, even in Korea, there is about on average, magnitude 3 and large earthquake, about 10 magnitude 3 and large earthquakes every year. So even within the plate boundary, we expect to see the earthquakes sometimes.
So although Korea does not sit on the Ring of Fire, there are possibilities of an earthquake hitting the country. Fortunately, the epicenters of the recent quakes that hit off Korea's east coast was far enough not to cause any inland damage. But some were still worried about a possible tsunami. For our viewers, could you tell us what conditions, on what the exact conditions are for a tsunami warning to be issued?
Actually, the tsunami generation, it was generated by the seafloor deformations, but in general, the tsunamis are generated by very gigantic large earthquakes, like magnitude 8 or 9. So for the last 2011 Tohoku Oki earthquake, its magnitude is 9 point something. So if the magnitude 3 or 4 earthquakes occur on the east coast of Korea, I don't think we need to too much worry about the the tsunami wave generation. But one concern I have is that if some magnitude, let's say 7 or 8 earthquakes occur on the west coast of Japan, we may need to worry about some tsunami hazard on the east coast of Korea. That's one possibility.
So we also have to keep an eye on earthquakes happening in Japan if it's close enough to the east coast of Korea.
Yes, intensity might be lower than what we saw for the 2011 Tohoku Oki earthquake, but we need to think about that as well.
Still need to watch out on that.
Yeah.
As you've mentioned, we learned a huge lesson from Japan's Fukushima disaster in 2011 regarding the hazardous consequences of a nuclear plant collapse. Now, Korea has 24, if I'm right, nuclear power plants, 18 of which are situated on the coastal areas near the East Sea. Do we need to be worried?
Well, maybe not too much, but it's a difficult question actually to answer. But I believe that people in the nuclear energy industry in Korea, I think they did their best job to make them safe enough. But the probability that something goes wrong may be very low, like 0.0001%. But I think the issue is that it cannot be zero. That's the thing. So, as you know, we drive every day, but there's traffic accident, and then we know that the airplane can crash down, but we go to the airport and to take a plane. So in some sense, I think we need to take the decision making at some point. So I think they are, in general, very safe enough, but in my personal opinion, it might not be that good idea to put too many power plants in one region. Yeah.
This may be an obvious question, but why are most of the power plants built along the coastal areas?
In my understanding, they were built in late 1970s and early 1980s, and at that time, the Busan and Ulsan and is close to some very big, gigantic industrial areas. So maybe in many ways, it's much easier, it's more useful to deploy them in that area.
Now, the increased number of quakes in Korea is also leading to concerns over volcanic activities on Mount Paektu, which is located on the border between North Korea and China. Is there a link between earthquakes and volcanic eruptions?
Well, first of all, I'm not studying volcanoes, so maybe I don't have in-depth expertise in that field. But as far as I understand, there is no like very large active fault lines near the Baekdu Mountain. So maybe less likely that the Baekdu Mountain was triggered by some nearby large earthquakes. So I think it may have its own process, an eruption or evolution process, which I don't know in details. Yeah.
What measures does Korea need to take to mitigate possible casualties or damage should another, perhaps more serious quake occur?
Yeah, actually, we are located within the intraplate region, but according to the historical documents, actually sometimes like in the past, like especially in the, let's say, 16th century, we have many destructive earthquakes. So we are for sure that someday we may have a very strong destructive earthquake, so it's very important to be prepared. In terms of prediction, now our technology is quite behind, to predict an earthquake in a very accurate way. So I think it's more important to assess the seismic hazard imposed in our country more accurately and then make our buildings more safe for the coming strong shaking. And also people, we need to be well trained if the strong shaking hit our building, what we are going to do, and after the event, what's the rapid response and so on. So we need to be well prepared. I think that's the best way.
In your opinion, how prepared do you think our nation is for strong earthquakes? How prepared is Korea?
Well, at least the government should pay much more attention to this area. So maybe some big investment in the field, in the research, and also some following the rapid response. They might be helpful. And I think at least some major buildings like schools and hospitals, they need to be retrofitted, so to make sure that they are safe enough for the strong shaking.
Now, are there any ongoing joint research or joint projects with other countries like China or Japan on earthquakes?
Well, we are aware that the international collaboration is very important, especially in this field. And I don't think we have very intensive collaboration project yet, but we often invite the researchers from Japan and China and then have this kind of in-depth discussion in our research institute to talk about various research issues. And also recently, I have been working together with one Japanese researcher to study the source mechanism of the 2016 Gyeongju earthquake, and we have been very successful and published the paper in a journal, scientific journal. So, yeah, we will keep this relation in a close way and between China and Japan, also maybe the United States and the European countries as well.
Before you go, could you give us some advice on necessary actions we need to take in case of an earthquake?
Yeah, I think if we start feeling shaking in this building, the most important thing we need to keep in mind is that instead of running out of to the gate, it's much better to get down under the desk, because it's almost impossible to get out of the building safely when the strong shaking hit us. So, and also the strong shaking is not going to last for that long, maybe like within a minute or just tens of seconds. So it's much more safe to stay inside under the desk, and then once the strong shaking passes by, and you still have time or chance to get out of the building. So I think that's one important thing.
So it's safer to stay indoors than to try to go out in the open space when a strong earthquake occurs?
Why the strong shaking hit your building? What I mean by that is that maybe if the building collapses, you may be in trouble. But in terms of probability, because the strong shaking hit your building for just tens of seconds, it's much better to stay under the desk and protect your head. And then once the shaking passes by, you may still have a chance to get out. And I think that's a better way of handling the shaking in your building.
All right, Dr. Song, thank you for your insights today.
My pleasure.
And that does it for this edition of News in Depth. From all of us here at Arirang, thank you for watching, and I hope to see you right back here, same time tomorrow.